7. 7 prime ministers. In 10 years. No other major democracy on earth has cycled through its national leadership at anything close to that pace. In June 2026, Keir Starmer became the latest to go, standing outside the most famous door in British politics, number 10 Downing Street, announcing his resignation after less than 2 years in office. And the cameras rolled. The commentators talked. The headlines focused on the drama. But here is what the political coverage almost always misses. This is not just a story about politics. It is a story about money. Because behind every prime minister who has walked out of that famous black door, behind every resignation speech, behind every leadership contest, is the same underlying problem. An economy that has been quietly falling behind for a decade. And a population that is running out of patience. Welcome to the money trail. Let us follow it. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel is about one thing: connecting the dots between money, power, and the decisions that shape your world. No jargon. No agenda. Just clear research-backed analysis that tells you the story behind the money. Now let us get into it. Imagine earning almost the same wage you earned 20 years ago, while everything around you became more expensive. Your rent, your groceries, your energy bill, your children's school costs, everything rising. Your wages barely moving. That is not a hypothetical scenario for millions of British workers. That has been their reality. Real wage growth in Britain has been unusually weak since the financial crisis. Business investment has been consistently below comparable economies. And OECD and IMF data show the UK has fallen further behind the United States in living standards over the past 2 decades. The gap is real. The gap is measurable. And the gap has been growing. This is the economic backdrop against which 7 prime ministers have come and gone. And it is the story that rarely makes the front page. At the center of Britain's economic story over the past decade sits one word: Brexit. On June 23, 2016, Britain voted to leave the European Union. It was the most consequential economic decision the country had made in generations. And the evidence of its cost has grown steadily since. A major study by economists from the National Bureau of Economic Research, supported by Bank of England corporate data, estimated that by 2025, Brexit had reduced UK GDP per capita by around 6 to 8% compared to what it would otherwise have been. 6 to 8%. Let that sink in. This is not fringe analysis. This comes from some of the most rigorous economic research published on the topic. Multiple respected studies using different methodologies have reached broadly similar conclusions. Business investment fell significantly below comparable economies. Labor shortages emerged as EU workers left. Import costs rose. Food became more expensive. Bloomberg Economics estimates Brexit has reduced economic output by roughly £100 to £200 billion annually compared to a no-Brexit scenario. Every year. The Bank of England's own governor, Andrew Bailey, has spoken with unusual directness about this. He told journalists that reducing the size of the markets we trade with tends to have a negative impact on growth. That is a central banker saying, in the most careful language available to him, that Brexit has made Britain poorer. But Brexit alone does not explain 7 prime ministers in 10 years. It is one layer of a much deeper problem. Let us go back further. The global financial crisis of 2008 hit Britain hard. The government responded with years of austerity, cutting public spending to reduce the deficit. Those cuts hit public services. local councils, welfare programs, the health service. They reduced living standards for millions of people in post-industrial towns and cities. Places that had already been left behind by decades of deindustrialization. Places where the factories closed decades earlier and never came back. Places where the jobs that replaced the old ones paid less and offered less security. Then Brexit arrived, promising to take back control, to redirect money to public services, to restore national pride. For many of those left behind communities, it felt like an answer. Then came the pandemic in 2020. Then the energy shock from Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Then fresh energy pressures in 2026. Each crisis landed on an economy that was already weakened, already stretched, already carrying the weight of years of underperformance. And through all of it, prime ministers came and went. David Cameron. He called the Brexit referendum believing he would win it. He lost. He resigned the next morning. Theresa May. She tried to deliver Brexit. Parliament rejected her withdrawal agreement 3 times. She resigned. Boris Johnson. He delivered Brexit, at least legally. But his government collapsed amid a cascade of scandals. He resigned. Liz Truss. 45 days. Her government presented a budget that rattled financial markets. The pound crashed to historic lows against the dollar. The Bank of England was forced to intervene to prevent a pension fund crisis. She resigned. Rishi Sunak. He led his party to a historic election defeat. He resigned. And now Keir Starmer. He won a landslide election victory in 2024, promising stability after years of chaos. Less than 2 years later, gone. His party suffered serious losses to the hard-right Reform UK party in local elections. Reform won in working-class post-industrial communities that had voted for the left for generations. The same communities hit hardest by austerity. The same communities that voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. The same communities where wages have barely moved in 20 years. The money trail runs directly through them. So what happens now? Andy Burnham, the former mayor of Greater Manchester, has emerged as a leading figure in discussions about Labour's future direction. Some political commentators have suggested he could emerge as a future Labour leader. He built his reputation turning around post-industrial communities in northern England, attracting investment, building transport connections, creating opportunities in places that had been written off. Whether he or anyone else can address the underlying economic forces driving Britain's political instability remains the central question. Because the inheritance is substantial, government debt is elevated, inflation is running above target, interest rates remain high, GDP growth forecasts are modest at best, and the living standards gap with comparable economies continues to widen. Whoever becomes the next Prime Minister will not be starting from a clean slate. They will be starting from a deep hole. One that 7 predecessors could not climb out of. Britain is often described as America's closest ally. But zoom out for a moment. Because the forces driving British political instability are not uniquely British. Globalization created enormous wealth. But that wealth did not reach everyone equally. The communities that lost factories and industries never fully recovered. And when economic insecurity persists for a generation, people vote for change. Any change. Even dramatic change. Even change that the established parties warn against. That pattern is not a British story. It is a global story. And it raises a question worth sitting with. If political instability can take hold in one of the world's oldest and most stable democracies, what does that tell us about the forces reshaping politics everywhere? That question does not have an easy answer. But following the money always gets you closer to one. So let us follow the trail one final time. 7 prime ministers in 10 years. Behind each resignation is the same story. A financial crisis that triggered austerity. Austerity that deepened inequality. A referendum that added new economic costs on top of existing ones. A series of crises that stretched the economy further. And a population in left-behind communities that has been told for 2 decades that better times are coming. And is still waiting. That is not a political story. That is a money story. The money trail leads through every closed factory. Every stretched public service. Every town where wages have been flat for 2 decades. 7 prime ministers could not fix it. The 8th will inherit exactly the same problem. That is the money trail behind Britain's political crisis. And now you have followed it. If this video helped you understand why political chaos is almost always an economic story in disguise, hit subscribe. Because every week, we follow a new trail. And there is always another trail waiting to be uncovered. I am the Money Trail. See you next week.